What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel, and I'm your host, Meko, joined once again by my guy, Morgan Cannon, and this is your go-to place for all things Lions related. That includes news, updates, analysis, and something special that we're going to be doing today for this draft season. Morgan and I are actually going to be reacting to mock drafts that are being released. We're not going to react to every mock draft, but we are going to try to hit the big ones. And today you get a very special episode because we're going to do a 2-in-1. Daniel Jeremiah recently dropped his mock draft 1.0 this week, and Mel Kiper actually dropped his 1.0 mock draft last week. So Morgan, we got two mock drafts that with two guys that have actually made drastically different picks for the Lions. And I'm actually really interested in talking about it because I think they both do a good job of hitting needs, but I think they definitely view those needs differently, considering like how I think even the fan base may view them.
Right, and it's always in retrospect, every year, it's always interesting to go back and look at these, like, mock draft, 1.0s and 2.0s, because typically,
Hmm.
right, Miko, they're taking place before free agency, and, there's all these perceived, like, "Oh, the Lions are gonna go this, and the Chiefs are gonna do this," but we really don't know until, we get closer to draft season, but as it stands right now, these 2, big these are 2 big names in the draft industry. They do hit, to your point, 2 pretty solid needs if you pulled the fan base right now in
Yeah.
offensive line help and then edge help, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And so just so we can kind of set the table for what this series will basically be, because that's kind of what it's going to be, is going to be like a little mini series over here on the YouTube channel. Morgan and I are more or less just going to react to the picks. So we're not going to go through the entire mock draft for both, draft analysts. We're really just going to focus on who the Lions are picking, whether or not we agree or disagree with the picks and what we like about the picks, as well as is there any other pick that we could see the Lions making in that exact same spot based off of how the analysts have the mock draft going. By the end of this, we are also going to just give like a solid grade on how we would feel if this was the pick on draft night. Doesn't mean that, like Morgan said, doesn't mean that our grade wouldn't change based off of what the Lions do in free agency. And there still is, to your point, Morgan, so much information that still has to be gathered between now and draft night. The Senior Bowl kicks off this week. I believe the East West Shrine game just recently ended. We still have the combine, we still have pro days. A lot of things are still set in place where you're going to see guys fall, you're going to see guys rise. A lot of movement is still to be had in this draft season.
Yeah, and that's what it's like going to be a quick 3 months. It sounds like it's a long time, but right now I think we're tracking it's a little bit less than 3 months. We're recording this on January 27th. It's really cold in Detroit. But yeah, by the time there'll be some birds chirping and we'll have a lot more information. And we're going to try to be I'm not the biggest draft guy, but I'm going to try to lean into it a little bit more this year with you, my brother Miko, obviously, Eric, my guy Anthony. We're going to try to lean into it and hopefully create some like good content for you guys to where you can
Yeah.
be more informed because the Lions are in a interesting spot here, right, Miko, in the middle of the round rather than the last several picks like they've been the last few years because you're picking typically classes depend, but you're usually picking in a different tier.
Yeah, I think so. I think, and that's one of the things where people have been so critical of Brad Holmes the last couple of years of like, man, specifically the last 2 years of questioning the talent that he's been able to get. And it's not saying it's impossible, but yeah, you do start to move into different tiers based off of class depth. And if you're in the like basically where the Lions are at the 17th pick, you're kind of close to the middle of the draft. So you should be able to still get some top tier talent or at least have that flexibility to be aggressive or to maybe even trade back and collect some more picks. So with that said, Morgan, let's go ahead and start with Mel Kiper's draft. And with the 17th pick, Mel Kiper actually has the Lions going with the guard out of Penn State. Because I don't want to butcher his name, I'm just going to go calling him by Vega. Ioane is his last name. Great pick in terms of helping to bolster this offensive line. Mel Kiper goes on to kind of, in his explanation, kind of point to the fact that the Lions do need a lot of help in the run game. And if you look back at this past season, they did kind of struggle in the middle of that offensive line. Part of it was due to health, part of it was to some new starters. My only kind of drawback to this pick is that if you're talking about a group that kind of did struggle with some new bodies in there, you're talking about adding another young face in Vega, who Also, when you start to look at his collegiate career, primarily played left guard. So you're talking about somebody, at the very least, you're expecting to compete with the likes of Christian Mahogany for that starting left guard position. Not to mention what it possibly means for, the center position. Does that mean that you're fully committing to Tate moving to center? And if so, does that mean Mahogany immediately slides over to right guard? What happens with Miles Frazier? I think by making a pick like this, you do provide some clarity to the offensive line, but it also still leaves a lot of questions.
Yeah, and you pose a bunch of really good questions, and I'll throw one more in there. Like, what's Taylor Decker doing? Like, do we have that information by the time that Brad Holmes
Mhm.
is making that pick? Because if they do or don't, say they don't, then I'm glad that they're adding talent and they're backing up their words about wanting more competition, right? At spots like
Yeah.
Brad and Dan have said that. So I think they're backing their words up there, and then they're also adding talent, but at the same time it's not an answer to the tackle position, and
Yeah.
ideally you'd want somebody who could play there. And yeah, that to your point, excuse me, they're going to have a there's going to be so much discourse about how the offensive line will be late, like what it'll look like week 1, because ideally you get your best 5 guys out there, but like what does that look like? To your point, like
Mhm.
does it look like Tate moving to center, Mahogany at right guard, and then Ione at left guard, and then who's at tackle? Obviously, Panay either at right or left tackle. So I'm glad that if this were the situation and how it shook out, I'm glad they, went this way. But I'm also wondering
Mhm.
who's going to play tackle in 2026, because unless you address that via free agency, I'm not sure that answers on the roster right now.
Yeah, and I think when you look at how this draft class is at least shaping up in the early parts, the expectation, at least when you look at both Kuiper and Jeremiah's draft, is that they expect like the top 2 tackles in this class to probably go fairly high, like potentially being top 5 picks with both Myalaga out of Miami and Fano out of Utah. There are other tackles in this class. And so, like, if it were me personally, while I think Ione would be a great pick in terms of bolstering that interior offensive line, I would rather see the Lions possibly even trade back if they're not comfortable, if they don't feel like they have that high of a grade on one of these tackles that are left. When you talk about Caden Proctor out of Alabama, I know Utah has another really good guard that believe plays left tackle specifically. Like, that's another good option that I would love to see the Lions explore. In a situation like this, if you're, like I said, if you don't feel like the tackle that you want is there, why not potentially trade back? Especially like you said, if you don't have the Taylor Decker situation out. And honestly, like, I've kind of been a proponent of, even if Taylor Decker says he's coming back, I'm still a proponent of taking a tackle hop.
Oh yeah, yeah, that would make me really happy. If you got a tackle that had guard flexibility, like that'd be the ideal
Mhm.
situation both for the
Yeah.
2026 and beyond. But then on the flip side, you're getting a lot of people's top interior offensive linemen, like that's what Ione is classified as right now, ahead of a lot of testing and everything else. But he is a lot of people's top interior offensive lineman. So if he's another elite player, then I don't know, then maybe I'm happy with that pick. But yeah, trading back would be nice. But then also I wonder if, Myalaga or Fanu slides, does Brad get
Yeah.
a little trigger happy and move up and get your long-term guy who can play guard in 2026 if Decker's back? I wouldn't be mad at that either, but I know a lot of people don't want to trade up.
At this point in time, like, I would understand the hesitancy, especially when there are other tackle options. You talk about Caleb Lomu out of the other tackle out of Utah, like I mentioned, Caden Proctor
Mhm.
as well. Monroe Freeling, the tackle out of Georgia. Like, there are. It does seem like this is a fairly deep, like, tackle guard class when you talk about guys that can potentially play both roles. So I would understand fans if they were a little frustrated with Dan being super aggressive and feeling like he has to get one of those 2 guys. With that said, I think both of you you and I both kind of view those 2 guys in a separate tier from the guys that I just listed. Like, they are kind of like the cream of the crop when it comes down to tackles. With that said, if this was the pick, if Ione was the pick on draft night, what is the grade that you would give the Lions or Brad Holmes or just the pick in general for this individual?
I would give it a B plus because it's addressing what, in my opinion, what is the biggest need for the Lions right now. They need to get back to whipping people up front, and that starts with having people movers on the offensive line besides just Panay right now. And Tate was
Mhm.
moving people. I give Tate credit. Tate was good, really good at times in the run game. Still working out some other things in terms of like pre-snap checks and the mental side of things, but that's going to come. The game's going to slow down. But yeah, if you get Ione, I give it a B plus because it's addressing a major need, but I wouldn't give it an A just because he doesn't have that tackle to guard or that guard to tackle flexibility. Whereas the two you mentioned, Myalaga and Fanu, I think both of those guys could project, like they could easily slide in for a year, be really good, and then project to be your long-term tackle. That would get an A for me. What about you?
Yeah, I would probably give it about a B as well. I think Ione would be great, a great addition to his interior offensive line, specifically in pass protection. Like that's where if you go to his PFF grades, that is where he's typically graded out the best as an interior lineman is in pass protection. He's been okay or really like I would say good in run blocking, but I don't necessarily think that you're getting maybe the people mover that you think you are. But at the same time, you put a talent like that with Hank Fraley,
Next
along
to
an offensive
Panay.
line that features, yeah, like possibly next to Panay and with an improved, hopefully Tate Ratledge and things like that, I could see this still work out really well. So like I can't give it less than a B because I think the talent is that good. But at the same time, like I'm with you, I would still probably prioritize like the tackle spot or even edge at this spot specifically based off of who is still available on the board. So for me, it would be a B. But I think between the two of us, like I think that would probably average out to about a B. You giving it a B plus, me giving it a B. That's a solid grade, I think, either way. But I know there are Lions fans that would love a juicier pick, a much more tantalizing pick. And I think that's what Daniel Jeremiah kind of gives the Lions in his mock draft, right?
Yeah, and it's going to appeal to the side of the fan base that's been talking about getting an edge rusher to pair with Aiden Hutchinson for a while now. And I get it. Ideally, you'd like to get there because it is a luxury. I want to make that point too. There's not a lot of teams out there that have two, S tier edge rushers out there. I think it's like a few off
Hmm.
the top of my head, like Houston with Daniil Hunter and Will Anderson.
Yeah.
Can't really think of another one, man. Like my threshold is high if you're S tier. Like that's you're a dog player. But if you can get, like, I count Hutch as an S tier rusher. There's still some things I want him to improve on. But if you get a guy like Akeem Messidor out of Miami, I would be pretty good with that because could be like a little Batman and Robin situation early on. And I
Hmm.
think that'd be enough to, you help out your back end, right, Miko? Like being able to get after the quarterback with four people. And I think you're taking a step in that direction if you take Messidor.
Absolutely. I think that was one of the other things that people were very critical of this season is the pass rush. I wouldn't say the consistency because they definitely like got the sack numbers, right? You look at the end of the year, the Lions were one of the top teams in just generating total sacks, but the thing that they struggled with specifically was pressure rate and how quickly they were getting pressure there. But you talk about adding a guy like Messidor to a Lions team that does have an Aiden Hutchinson that will have an Aleem McNeil that's a year removed from an injury. You'll have, again, the same way with Tate Ratledge, hopefully an improved Tyleek Williams as well. I do like the fit of this and potentially having someone that's a little bit of a different mold than Aiden Hutchinson. Aiden is, he's bigger. He doesn't have like extremely long arms, but he's definitely taller, bigger frame, and attacks offensive lines in a different way. Isidore is like stout. Like we're talking about a guy that's somewhere between 270, 280. It's going to be really interesting to see what his combine measurables are. But standing at about three, I think you're getting another Josh Pascal type of player, hopefully with just better upside and better health and more consistently being on the field. Because if you get a guy that is that type of like has that level of versatility, I think that's where you can get Aiden Hutchinson in a lot more advantageous situations where he doesn't always have to be lined up on the outside. We saw the Lions kick Aleem out a little bit. So like a guy like Messidor would kind of help unlock that defensive line potential in terms of giving a Kelvin Shepard some creative things to do with his pass rush schemes.
Yeah, and I'd be happy because I'm tired of the using an Aleem at like the big end, like the 4-eye,
Yeah.
if you guys are following me here. So I think that would get rid of a lot of that because they did that out of necessity, right? Because
Hmm.
they're trying to get their best players on the field, but it does kind of it limits what you can do pre-snap in terms of, like you said, Miko, like lining up Aiden in creative ways, like letting him stand in the A gap on an obvious pass rushing down. Because I think they did that a little bit at the end of the year. And I remember he hit somebody with a sweet spin move, and it
Yeah.
resulted in a quick pressure and an easy sack to the point Miko was making earlier. Like the Lions statistically sack wise looked okay, but if they can continue to turn up the pressure, and if you get a healthy Aleem McNeil back next year and you have some, Tyleek takes a step. And I do. Messator is an interesting prospect, and he'll be one to see. I want to see how he measures both height,
Yeah.
weight, and how he moves in space, because I think he'll primarily be a pass rusher. Obviously, like that'll be the vast majority of his snaps. But if he can drop into space a little bit, I'm not asking him to be Derek Barnes out there. Then that's something the Lions could continue to incorporate, is some of that Sam stuff where he's standing, but he could drop. Most of the time he's not going to drop though, because he's a really good pass rusher. But yeah, 12 and a half sacks. The production's there. He's Canadian, so that's interesting. But yeah, I'd be happy with that. I know a lot of people would be happy.
I think so. I think once again, it's a name that a lot of people are familiar with. You talk about the fact that he had 12 and a half sacks this past season, but you look at his overall collegiate career, a guy that was able to rack up 35 and a half sacks between Miami and West Virginia. So, like, this is a guy that's known for production. But at the end of the day, we know one thing with the Lions is for sure, whether you love it or hate it, as great as it is that you can possibly get to the quarterback, you gotta be able to defend the run. And that's something that Messidor does just as well. You look once again at his PFF grade. Again, these grades aren't everything, but just as a good way of just looking and framing how they play in every aspect of the game. Third highest graded pass rusher in 2025, with a 90.5, run defense grade. So it's a guy that you don't have to take off the field on first and second down. Like, you can potentially have him out there as a 3-down player. And you talk about, depending on how he tests, if he does show some good athleticism, like maybe he does have that versatility to play some of that Sam linebacker role, or again, it's just another way that you can utilize him. My only concern with this pick is like what you're saying. If he tests well, my only concern is that he's not there at 17. Because like, you look at this level of production, you add that with like some freakish athleticism, other teams in the top 15, top 10 are going to be like, oh, that we could use that.
That's a great point. Honestly, if he runs really well and moves well, and some of those positional like style drills where they're putting like it's a team's coach at the combine putting you through like movement and like getting around bags and working all that. I think if he moves really well there, that could boost his stock. But yeah, I like the potential, man, because if you draft him in theory, week 1, down 1 in a neutral down next year, it's Aiden, Aleem, Tyleek, and then a Messidor. And they're all really good run defenders, potentially great run defenders. And then hopefully the pass rush juice gets better as the year goes on and you'd be cooking.
Yeah, I think this is a pick that I would absolutely love. The only other option, and it's same to Ione when we talked about him. If the Lions weren't going to go in this direction, it is just like, hey, can you get a tackle, right? Do you probably prioritize the offensive line over getting a pass rusher? I know there are fans that would be upset by that, especially if a guy like this is available, but I can understand, specifically looking at how last year's offensive line looked, and depending on what happens with Taylor Decker, if the Lions did decide to trade back, specifically if you trade back, get more picks. And I think this is another class with both the offensive line and the defensive line. I think there is some talent to where if the Lions were like, hey, we're not just focused on this guy, we think there are some other guys in maybe the second round, the third round that we could potentially get, especially if you can get a third round pick, Morgan, because the Lions don't have one this year. I understand people would be upset in the moment, but I would be like hesitant to necessarily react negatively if the Lions traded back specifically for a tackle.
For sure. Here's the thing. They're 1A and 1B, in my opinion, if we're going into free agency, the draft, the whole nine. Upgrading the offensive line and the defensive line are 1A, 1B. Secondary, probably after that, you can argue whatever. But I think offensive line has to be the first precedent, because if that's everything. If you make the offensive line really good again, then having a S tier pass rush becomes a little less, significant, because you're controlling, you're dictating the pace of games, you're shoving footballs up, people's noses. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
I think it's it's offensive line first for me, and then defensive line. So if they went that way and they're like, let's get our tackle that can maybe kick into guard and let's pick up an extra pick, I'm not going to hate them for that, But I know a lot of people won't be happy because, hopefully they address the edge rusher opposite. They're going to the position opposite.
They have to.
Yeah,
it's not even like they're going to. They have to. Like,
have
I think
to.
Aiden is the only. Aiden and Hassanin, I think, are the only pass rushers that are on the roster as of right now contractually. So like,
yep,
they have to. So
Tyler Lacey, if you want to keep counting.
Yep. So I mean, yeah, I think when you look at it in that context, what's the grade that you would give a pick like this if it was Messidor at pick 17?
I'd have to give an A, because as it stands right now, he's going to start day one, and that's what you
Mhm.
want. That's what you want out of your first round pick, ideally for me right now. You know, there are instances when a first round pick might not start, but ideally your first round pick is a day one starter and he's an impact player if you can make that happen. And I think he'd slot in. If you take Messidor at 17, he'd slot in perfectly with the rest of this lineup, and he could unlock some things. You know, I'm already thinking about what he could do from like a schematic standpoint for Kelvin Shepard.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think this would be an A for me as well. Like you said, immediately slides in, fills a need along your defensive line. I think the fact that he does play the run so well, like there could be a good amount of expectation that like, hey, he can be a three down player for you if you feel like he's not quite up to snuff in terms of defending the run. I think we could still potentially see something that I think Alliance fans also want. It's like, hey, if he can't play the run perfectly right away, just throw him out there on third down. At least have him out there to get after the quarterback. And I think with his youth and his athleticism that we are still yet to see and see how that tests out, like I think that could be a great combination, especially with Aiden, being the driving force that he is on the opposite side of him. So I'm right there with you. I think these are two solid mock drafts. I know, like you said earlier, like mock drafts can kind of be all over the place, and they're going to continue to be all over the place whether it's with Mel Kiper, whether it's Daniel Jeremiah. I know Bucky Brooks is probably likely to have his mock draft probably drop next week because I think him and Daniel Jeremiah typically rotate weeks. So we're going to get a good look at a wide variety of what could potentially be available. And that picture is only going to get clearer or potentially more fuzzy as the rest of the offseason goes on. So I'm kind of really looking forward to doing this series, and kind of just talking about the different options that the Lions do have available to them.
Yeah, and we're going to have content around the draft soon enough. It'll be the end of the season will be here, and then free agency is just around the corner. So
Yeah.
that's going to dictate a lot. Well, for Brad Holmes, if you guys know how he operates, his goal is to not have any like, oh, the Lions have to take an edge rusher or they have to take a tackle. He doesn't want to go into the draft that way because that's how you end up reaching or
Mhm.
overvaluing or however you want to phrase it. You end up doing things you don't want to do if you go into the draft that way. So um, I'm excited, man. It's a big offseason for the Lions because we know how good this core is. We know what they're capable of. It's just going to take couple little tweaks, and in
Yeah.
my opinion, they're going to be right back as a Super Bowl contender. So going to be a big year.
Absolutely. So with that said, guys, let us know in the comment section below, what do you think of these two picks? Which one would you prefer? And how would you grade them based off of the picks that Mel Kiper and Daniel Jeremiah, gave them? As you know, me and Morgan gave the Vega pick a B, basically averaging it out, and we both agreed that the Messidor pick would be an A. So let us know your comments in the comment section below. And like always, if you're looking for any more additional Lions content, you can find that over on the Pride of Detroit website. In fact, I believe Eric has already started dropping his mock draft roundup. So if you want to get, or if you want to have one place where you can get all of your mock draft information, always head over to the website because I believe he drops that every Saturday or Sunday. So definitely keep an eye out for that as well. So with all that said, I'm Meko. He's Morgan. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you guys in the next one.